Some mornings, you wake up and the ceiling feels too familiar. The same walls, the same sounds, the same light coming through the same window. Nothing is wrong exactly, but something inside you stirs. Quiet, restless, persistent, a pull towards somewhere you cannot name. A feeling that the life you are living is only one version of the life you could be living. It is not sadness, it is not boredom. It is something older than both. People call it wanderlust, that deep, almost physical need to move, to leave, to discover what exists beyond the edge of what you already know. But here's the question that most of us never stop to ask. Where does that feeling actually come from? And what is it really looking for? To understand wanderlust, we have to go back much further than airports or maps or even roads. We have to go back to a time when moving was not a choice. It was survival. For most of human history, our ancestors did not stay in one place. They followed animals across vast plains. They moved with the seasons, tracking where food grew and where water could be found. Staying still for too long meant death. The ones who felt the urge to explore new territory, to cross the next hill, to follow the river further, were more likely to find resources, escape danger, and survive. Scientists have found a small but significant connection between a gene called DRD47R and the tendency toward curiosity, restlessness, and the desire for new experiences. This gene appears more frequently in populations with long histories of migration. It is sometimes called, informally, the wanderlust gene. Not everyone carries it, but enough people do that it tells us something important. The desire to move is not weakness, and it is not escapism. It is, in part, biology. But genes alone do not explain the full depth of what we feel. There is something else woven into the experience, something more emotional than physical. When early humans moved into new territory, they were not just feeding their bodies. They were feeding something else entirely. Every new landscape brought new information. New sounds, new dangers, new beauty. The brain had to stay alert, engaged, fully present. And in that state of active discovery, something in the mind lit up, a feeling of aliveness that routine, by its nature, could never produce. This is important to understand, my friends. The brain is not designed to be comfortable. It is designed to be curious. Comfort is something we seek after difficulty. It is a reward, not a permanent state. When life becomes too predictable, too familiar, too safe, the brain begins to signal that something is missing, not because anything is truly wrong, but because stillness, in the original human experience, was always temporary. A person living in a settled village 1,000 years ago would still have known this feeling. Watching travelers pass through, hearing stories of distant lands, feeling something unnamed stir inside them. The feeling did not require a passport or a plane ticket. It only required a horizon. And this is what we inherit. Not just the shape of our bodies or the color of our eyes, but this ancient restlessness, this quiet refusal to believe that here is all there is. We carry it without knowing where it came from. We feel it on slow Sunday afternoons or in the middle of ordinary weeks or at the edge of sleep, that low, persistent hum of somewhere else, something more, not yet. It is not a modern invention. It is not a trend. It is one of the oldest things inside us. At some point in human history, something quietly shifted. Moving was no longer only about survival. People had built settlements, planted crops, created systems that allowed them to stay in one place and still live well. The urgent, daily need to wander had faded. And yet, the feeling did not disappear. It simply changed shape. What was once instinct became desire, and desire over time became culture. The ancient Greeks had a concept they lived by, that a person who had never left their hometown could never truly understand the world or themselves. Young men of good standing were expected to travel, to study in distant cities, to sit with thinkers and merchants from other lands, not as entertainment, as education, as formation. The Romans built roads stretching across thousands of kilometers, not just for armies, but for the movement of people, goods, and ideas. And those roads quietly taught an entire civilization that the world was larger than any single person's experience of it. By the 17th and 18th centuries, this idea had evolved into something even more deliberate. Wealthy young Europeans embarked on what became known as the Grand Tour, a structured journey through France, Italy, and beyond, lasting months or sometimes years. The purpose was not simply pleasure. It was believed that exposure to ancient ruins, foreign art, and unfamiliar customs would shape a person's character in ways that no classroom ever could. A young man returning from his grand tour was expected to be changed, more thoughtful, more formed, more fully himself. This tells us something worth holding on to. For a long time, humans understood travel not as escape, but as transformation. The journey outward was always understood to be a journey inward at the same time. You left your familiar world so that when you returned, you could see it and yourself more clearly. Even ordinary people felt this in smaller ways. A farmer who walked 2 days to reach a market in a distant town came back with more than goods. He came back with stories, with comparisons, with a slightly wider sense of what life could look like. There is something quietly profound in that, because it means wanderlust was never really about the destination. It was about what movement does to the mind. The moment you step outside your usual world, your brain shifts into a different mode. It becomes more observant, more open, more alive to detail. A street you would ignore at home becomes fascinating when it exists somewhere unfamiliar. The same sky looks different when you are standing somewhere you have never stood before. This is what travel was slowly becoming. Not just physical movement, but a recognized path towards self-understanding, a ritual that cultures began to build meaning around. The urge to wander had found its place in human life, not as something to be overcome or explained away, but as something to be honored, organized, and passed down. It was no longer just instinct. It had become intention. But here's where the story becomes more honest. Because if travel truly gave us everything we were searching for, we would stop searching. And most of us never do. There's a feeling that experienced travelers know well, even if they rarely talk about it. You have planned the trip for months. You have imagined the place so many times it almost feels real already. And then you arrive. The city is beautiful. The light is exactly as you pictured. You are standing in the middle of everything you wanted, and somewhere underneath the wonder, quietly, almost embarrassingly, there is a hollowness. Not disappointment exactly, something harder to name than that. The Germans have a word for the feeling wanderlust creates in reverse. Fernweh. It means a longing for far-off places. But what no single word captures is what happens when you reach the far-off place and realize the longing did not stay behind. It came with you. It always comes with you. A woman who spent years saving money to travel through Southeast Asia described it this way. She said that in every new city, for the first day or two, she felt completely alive, hyper-present, grateful. And then, gradually, the feeling would soften. The streets would start to feel ordinary, and she would find herself opening a new tab, looking at the next destination, already planning the next departure before she had fully arrived where she was. She thought something was wrong with her. There was not. This is one of the quiet conflicts at the heart of wanderlust. The feeling that drives us to travel is the same feeling that makes it difficult to be fully satisfied by travel. Because what we are chasing is not a place. It is a state, a particular quality of attention. That sharp, open, fully present awareness that new experiences produce in us. And that state, by its nature, fades. Familiarity is its enemy. So we move again and again, always toward the next horizon. Psychologists sometimes describe this as the hedonic treadmill, the tendency for humans to return to a baseline level of feeling no matter what new experience they add to their lives. Travel lifts us, genuinely. But the lift is temporary, and the return to ordinary feeling can leave us more restless than we were before. This does not mean travel is meaningless. It means we have sometimes misunderstood what it is for. When we treat travel as a solution, as the thing that will finally make us feel complete, we place a weight on it that no journey can carry. We arrive expecting transformation and leave carrying the same unresolved questions we brought with us, just wrapped in new photographs. The restlessness does not come from not having traveled enough. It comes from not understanding what the restlessness is actually asking for, and that is a much harder journey to take. At some point, the world noticed that wanderlust was not going away, and so it built an industry around it. The modern travel industry is one of the largest economic systems on the planet, Before the disruptions of the early 2020s, tourism accounted for roughly 1 in 10 jobs worldwide. Entire cities restructured themselves around the desires of visitors. Cultures learned to present themselves in ways that felt exciting to outsiders. The ancient human urge to explore had been measured, packaged, and placed on a shelf with a price tag. This is not entirely a bad thing. More people today can experience more of the world than at any point in human history. Flights that once cost a year's salary now cost a week's wages. A person born in the small town can wake up, book a ticket, and be standing on another continent within 24 hours. The democratization of travel is, in many ways, a genuine expansion of human freedom, but something else happened alongside it. Wanderlust, which was once a personal and somewhat mysterious feeling, became a social performance. When photographs of travel existed only in personal albums, a journey belonged entirely to the traveler. The experience was interior, something felt, remembered, integrated slowly over time. But when travel became visible, shareable, measurable in likes and comments, its relationship with identity shifted. The journey outward became, for many people, a way of constructing and broadcasting a version of themselves. A young professional who travels to 12 countries in a year and documents every moment is not necessarily experiencing those places more deeply than someone who spends 3 quiet weeks in one small town. But the world increasingly rewards the first person and quietly overlooks the second. This shapes behavior in ways we do not always notice. There is a growing pattern among frequent travelers, moving fast, collecting destinations like checkboxes, chasing the visual rather than the felt experience. A famous square visited for 20 minutes, photographed and left behind. A local dish tasted once, captured and forgotten. Not because the traveler is shallow, but because the system they are operating inside quietly encourages surface over depth. The travel industry, like all industries, is designed to create return customers. And the fastest way to create a return customer is to ensure that no single journey ever feels fully complete. A man who traveled through 30 countries over 5 years once said something that stayed with me. He said that somewhere around country 20, he realized he could not clearly remember country 8. The experiences had started to blur, not because the places were not beautiful, but because he had moved through them too quickly to let any of them settle inside him. He had collected travel, but he had not been transformed by it. This is the quiet cost of wanderlust in the modern system. The feeling that once pointed us toward meaning now gets redirected, toward consumption, toward comparison, toward an endless scroll of somewhere else, someone else's horizon. The urge is still real, but the system built around it does not always serve what the urge is truly asking for. So if wanderlust is not fully satisfied by travel, what is it actually looking for? This is the question worth sitting with, because when you trace the feeling back far enough, past the Instagram feeds, past the industry, past even the history and the biology, you find something surprisingly simple at the center of it. Wanderlust is, at its deepest level, a longing to feel alive. Not alive in the basic, breathing sense, but alive in the fullest sense, present, awake, aware that this moment is real and unrepeatable. The reason new places produce that feeling so reliably is not because they are more beautiful than home. It is because they force us out of the half-conscious state that familiarity creates. When everything is new, we cannot afford to sleepwalk. We have to pay attention. And in paying attention to a street, a smell, a face, a quality of light, we remember, briefly, what it feels like to be completely here. This is what we are chasing. Not a destination, a quality of presence. And here's what makes that worth understanding. That quality is not locked inside foreign places. It lives inside the act of paying attention itself. The traveler who walks through a market in Marrakech with wide, open eyes is accessing the same state as a person who sits quietly in their own garden and truly notices, for the first time in years, the way the late afternoon light moves through the leaves. The geography is different. The inner experience is the same. This does not mean travel is unnecessary. It means travel is a teacher, not a destination. What the best journeys do, the ones that stay with us, that change us in quiet ways, is not show us beautiful places. They show us a different version of ourselves, a version that is curious, flexible, humble, and awake. And then they send us home with a question. Can you bring that version of yourself back here? Into the ordinary? That is the real journey and has no passport requirement. There is a kind of person who has traveled very little but carries a traveler spirit, genuinely curious, open to the unfamiliar, comfortable with uncertainty. And there is another kind of person who has visited 50 countries and returned from every one of them unchanged. The miles traveled and the inner distance covered are not always the same journey. Wanderlust, understood this way, is not a problem to solve. It is not restlessness to be cured by booking another flight. It is an invitation, quiet, persistent, ancient, to pay closer attention to the life you are already living, to treat the world around you, familiar as it is, with the same open eyes you would bring to somewhere you have never been. The horizon you are searching for, my friends, it is real, but it is closer than you think. It begins the moment you decide to truly look. Until next time, my friends, sleep well and stay curious.